to the FinTech Voices podcast. My name is Ian Davey. I'm the founder of FinTech-Tables and the host of today's show. FinTech-Tables are a multi-channel engagement platform dedicated to supporting the growth of the fintech sector in Scotland through events, marketing and media. We're currently delivering a series of events in support of the FinTech Scotland Research and Innovation Roadmap, which is the industry strategy for Scotland for the next 10 years. And our initial podcast series is going to focus on an episode dedicated to each of the priority pillars within that report. So that's financial regulation, payments and transactions, climate finance, and open finance data. And for today's episode, the topic will be the future of financial regulation. Now, just before we begin, a word about our sponsors. Pinsent Masons is an international law firm with a strong presence in Scotland. They have a sector focus, and financial services are one of their key sectors. They combine their understanding of regulatory matters with a deep knowledge of technology and advise a number of leading banks, insurers and wealth providers and fintechs. They also have a global focus, which of course includes Scotland. And now to the podcast for today, the future of financial regulation. So financial regulation plays a fundamental role in enabling the financial services industry and in supporting the wider development and growth of the economy. It's therefore no surprise that it's one of the core themes within the FinTech Scotland R&I roadmap. Access to technology and advances in data will play a fundamental role in progressing and enhancing the role of regulation across the industry. Today we're going to take a deeper dive into the topic as we consider what the future of financial regulation might look like and what businesses will need to do to adapt and embrace these changes. So joining us today, I'm delighted to welcome Yvonne Dunn, partner at law firm Pinsent Masons, and Dr. Mick O'Connor, founder of RegTech company Haelo. So Yvonne and Mick, delighted to have you here. Welcome to the show. Thanks. Nice to have you here. So let's maybe just kick off with some introductions. Yvonne, should we start with you? Obviously, you're a well-known face within the fintech sector in Scotland. But for those who don't know you, maybe just give us a little bit more information about yourself, the role that you're currently playing within the fintech ecosystem in Scotland, and the role of Pinsent Masons as well.
Sure, absolutely. Nice to be here today. So as you said, I'm a partner at Pinsent Masons. You've already kindly introduced us as a law firm. I've been at the firm for about 18 and a half years now, and my home office is in Glasgow, although I do spend a fair bit of time in Edinburgh and London, as well as really any other Pinsent Masons office that makes sense. Last week I was in Leeds, next week I'm in Manchester, so I get around. And my role within the firm is to lead our financial technology practice, which of course includes fintech. I spend a lot of my time advising financial services firms on technology change projects, including outsourcing, IT procurement, and I also advise fintechs, especially around collaboration and services arrangements that they may have with established financial services firms. And I've been involved with FinTech Scotland since pretty early days of its establishment, and it's been really great to see it and those fintech businesses that it focuses on grow in Scotland. So that's me.
Brilliant, Yvonne. Obviously a clear wealth of knowledge there around the fintech sector, so really looking forward to your contributions around today's discussion. And Mick, yourself, you've got a really interesting background. You've worked across a variety of sectors. So just, introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about what you're doing now and why financial services, and what really makes you a RegTech expert, if it's okay to call you that.
Yeah, no problem. So there's a few questions there. So firstly, thanks for having me. I'm Mick O'Connor. I'm the founder of Haelo, and as you mentioned, Ian, Haelo is a RegTech company that I founded in 2016. It wasn't a RegTech company back then, but it certainly is now. And we're focused on developing software which provides senior managers with governance, compliance, and threat intelligence oversight. As you mentioned, I've got a bit of an eclectic career. I've worked in oil rig construction, I've worked in oil refineries, warship building, petrochemical plants, worked in defence, I've worked in aerospace, I've worked in aviation, worked in energy, and I'm now in the space industry working as a director of Prestwick Spaceport. And I started my working life many years ago as an apprentice in the Clyde shipyards. expert. I think sometimes being an engineer from the west of Scotland, I think a degree of humility when I'm called an expert at anything. However, I would tend to call myself more of a governance, a risk and compliance expert who uses technology to solve important problems. And the important problem that I'm focused on right now is SMCR. Which is the Senior Managers and Certification Regime for those that are unfamiliar. So why do I get to call myself an expert? Well, there's probably at least two reasons. So firstly, I'm a chartered director, so I've been trained to be a director, and I'm also the Institute of Directors Chartered Director Ambassador for Scotland, and I'm the champion of good governance and board stewardship. And secondly, the subject of my PhD was how to make sense of emergence within complex organisations, which is actually about helping decision makers shorten the cycle time between detection of anomalous conditions and responding to them. And the shorter that cycle time, the less exposure an organisation will have to risk. So that's me.
Very impressive, Mick. And just the last point on that, like, why financial services? Like, what you're doing, it sounds like it can be applied to a variety of sectors, and you've got background in other space. So what's the attraction to financial services for you, and why do you think that the tools and the software that you've got is the best fit for this sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the point you make, Ian, is that I'm looking to develop agnostic software that I can move between verticals. That's the big prize. And I think RegTech is normally associated almost as a subset of FinTech, which isn't entirely correct, because in reality, RegTech can apply across multiple verticals. But RegTech is familiar to people within the financial sector, and I would say was largely embraced by people in the financial sector. When I talk about RegTech outside the financial sector, it's usually met with Reg what? So people aren't familiar with it. But the prize for Haelo, as I mentioned, is to develop an agnostic piece of software that initially solves the SM and CR challenge, and to really carve out a niche within the financial industry. But the big prize is then to take it to pharmaceuticals, aviation, rail, nuclear, and other heavily regulated industries. But certainly for the foreseeable future, I'm focused exclusively on the financial sector.
That's fantastic, mate. Thanks. And it's great to hear that it can be applied to other sectors and opportunities there for FinTech to collaborate in other spaces, which is great to hear. So Yvonne, just back with you. So if we just take a step back and sort of start at the very top, we just want to understand why financial regulation is so important. As Mick's saying, it's obviously well established within financial services. There's a good understanding around RegTech, but why is it so important, and why is it a priority theme for FinTech Scotland within their roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, well, financial regulation is going to apply to all financial institutions regardless of their size, and it's obviously pretty fundamental to them being able to operate. If you're not compliant with relevant regs, then you won't be able to do business. And so given the level of influence that it obviously therefore has, it's really important that regulation also supports what FinTech does. We don't want it to be seen just as a burden. And so I guess with that in mind, it's quite natural that FinTech Scotland made it one of the priority themes of the roadmap. And we can definitely see that the UK's regulators have led the way in terms of being progressive around how technology and innovation can contribute to the future of financial regulation. You know, the FCA came up with the regulatory sandbox, numerous other initiatives aimed at opening up financial regulation to innovation. So, as I said, it's just so important that financial regulation isn't a barrier to innovation in Scotland, and instead it's more of an enabler. And that's a big element of the roadmap and what FinTech Scotland is pushing.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting one. Is it an opportunity or is it a challenge? There's obviously a lot of burdens associated with it, and I think it's seen as a barrier. Like a lot of the conversations we're having with organisations is it's a barrier to them doing some of the work that they want to do. How do you see that, Mick? Do you see it as more of an opportunity or more of a challenge? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think if we view regulation as a challenge or a problem, then it will be a challenge and it will be a problem. And I think that if you look at most elements of regulation, people would normally recognise it. You know what? That's good practice. So I think we should not necessarily see this as a burden and say, well, this is about. I think to Yvonne's point, we want to be, legally compliant. We want to have a license to operate. And if we find ourselves on the wrong side of our compliance or regulation, then potentially we won't be operating for much longer. So to me, I think in terms of the opportunity, and I think particularly as it applies to the larger financial institutions, I think there's a view that perhaps some of the technology is a bit outdated, on old mainframes, etc. And I think we'll all recognise that. So I think there is an opportunity to embrace technology, arguably more than we already do, because I think that the more that we do that, I think the better we'll be in managing governance, managing risk, and managing compliance. And it will help us to become more agile, more interoperable, and make compliance affordable. I think regulation is here to stay. I don't think we're ever going to get the cost of compliance down to zero, but I think we can certainly reduce the cost of compliance. And I think technology and automation can help us certainly to get there. And I think that the challenge for me is that the Chancellor unveiled Edinburgh reforms during the course of late last year, which will mean there's a slight, let's call it a relaxation of certainly some of the EU regulatory requirements. But even if there's a relaxation in requirements, it still means a change to the current regime. And change means it still needs to be managed. So I think no matter what way you look at it, I think regulation's here to stay. It is dynamic, it will evolve, it will respond to market conditions and scandals. So I think the better we're at, I think, responding to it and being more responsive and agile to it. And I think probably changing our attitude towards it, rather than seeing it as a pain in the backside and a bit of a burden, is recognising that a lot of things that's in regulation are there for very good reasons. And I think that if we are compliant, then we'll operate good, solvent businesses as well.
Yeah, no, good points. I think obviously there's an education piece there talking about how it provides the foundations needed to give stable and safe financial services, etc. But then there's still, as someone who's running a fintech organisation, you've still got these day-to-day challenges that you're facing with it, and I think that for businesses is the key consideration. They want to be able to operate, they want to be able to be procured, they want to be able to partner with other organisations, and it's just really getting across how RegTech can support. And that's where do you see RegTech having the biggest impact, Mick, around this? Like where does it create the opportunity? And is it really just to the benefit of businesses as well, or is it a tool, I suppose, that we're also seeing that can benefit the regulators themselves as well?
Yeah, I think it really depends on, I think, the organisation, and I think the regulatory requirements that apply to that particular organisation. But if we look at, let's say, technology. So I think technologies such as AI, cloud computing, and blockchain are already here, and I think they'll continue to evolve and mature as technologies, and I think they'll become, I think, more valuable. I see space, ironically, playing a bigger role in the financial industry, particularly as it applies to ESG. I think ESG is becoming more of a challenge in terms of how we evidence compliance to ESG, and I think that's still to be overcome, and that could be a big challenge, but equally a big opportunity for the financial sector. And I attended an event a few weeks ago, which is an event organised by both FinTech Scotland and Space Scotland, which I fed back to Nicola at FinTech Scotland. It was one of the best events I've ever attended, ever. And it was a bit strange because what we had a group of economists and accountants sitting in a room with a group of engineers and scientists. And I think if that had happened 20 years ago, we'd have just all stared at each other and, what do we have in common? And it was a really vibrant event. Lots, the decibels were up, lots of conversation, lots of exchanges. And I think really what we focused on was the use of spaceborne assets to monitor and validate things like carbon emissions, air and water pollution, deforestation, water usage, etc. And much of that data comes free already. The challenge is how we then take that data and then convert it into actionable insights. And again, from a technology point of view, I think quantum key distribution, will become more prevalent, particularly in the fight against cyber crime. And there is a Glasgow-based company that I'm rooting for called Craft Prospect, who are developing technology that they hope to have in orbit in the next few years. And I think from a cyber perspective, that can revolutionize how we manage data security. I think machine learning is another aspect, and I think one of the areas I'm particularly interested in is humans and what I call people-powered intelligence and getting humans within the decision loop. So I think natural language processing, will have a bigger role to play. And again, as I said, it's something I'm really interested in as a source of threat intelligence. And I think Chat GPT, there's been a lot of conversations about that. And I think that is one example of NLP, but I genuinely believe it is only the tip of the iceberg. It is an impressive and it's a well-trained predictive model. However, it's what comes after ChatGPT that I think really intrigues me. And I think the final thing is crypto. And I think despite the FTX scandal, I think crypto is here to stay. As much as some people might not want it to be here, I think it is here to stay. And I think the challenge is how regulations and the regulator keeps apace with the changes and these new types of technologies.
It's fascinating stuff, and there's some amount of technology on the go at the moment. Loads of innovation happening. Just to take it back a step again, Yvonne, and just back to the roadmap. So Mick's outlined a whole range of technologies there that we're seeing come through and having an impact. But in terms of the roadmap and the strategy itself, what are the key areas within financial regulation and the key focus points there? Like, what can we expect to see as the next steps within Scotland as an industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think there are probably three key themes within the roadmap, and a lot of them go to some of the points that Mick's been making. I think the first theme is very much around simplifying compliance, as we've both been saying, there's no doubt that financial institutions have got this ever-growing amount of regulation that they need to adhere to. So anything that simplifies that is going to be welcome. You see commentators talking about there being more surface area for compliance gaps to open up. The more surface area you have of compliance, the more gaps you potentially have. So simplicity is going to help with that. And the roadmap talks about the reinvention of risk management with technology and data analytics, particularly using the data that financial institutions hold to generate information to improve the quality of decision making. And we can maybe talk about some of the challenges around that later. But I think the second theme in the roadmap is about how you evolve risk modelling and reinventing how risk management works using, again, tech and data. And that's going to allow financial institutions to take a new approach to how they address these areas like financial crime and fraud and anti-money laundering. And data analytics is at the heart of this. Financial institutions, particularly the established ones, have got these huge data lakes, but without the technology to support that, you can't make best use of all that data. So they might have all the data they need to fight financial crime, for example, but if it doesn't integrate in a way that allows the organization to have the whole picture or spot patterns, then obviously it's not as effective.
The data is a really interesting one. It's something that we keep hearing coming up time and time again, not just around RegTech, but other areas, particularly around like data governance and the data sharing side of it. Seems to be a bit of a challenge. What are your thoughts around that, Yvonne, and sort of opportunities to and strategies to overcome some of those?
Yeah, I mean, the issues with data and the management of data, the strategic use of data and data as an asset are huge. And they're huge in a number of sectors, but in financial services in particular, this comes up a lot. If we think about, what Mick was alluding to earlier about some of the technology, the legacy technology being sort of mainframe type technology, and then the fact that you've got this data in silos, but you can't get it to talk to itself and each other, and that just is such a hindrance to then being able to form a rounded view of whatever it is you need to form a rounded view of. And that might be in the world we're in today, talking about just compliance and being able to identify the right kinds of patterns, or it might be in more kind of product and sales development areas where you don't get the rounded picture of a customer the way you should, because you know them in various guises, but you haven't been able to put that together. And I think, where fintechs and regtechs can support on that with solutions that are more the kind of as a service type solutions, that's potentially an opportunity, because a lot of these fintechs and regtechs are born in the cloud, so they don't have those same burdens of legacy technology that many of the older financial institutions do. So they can sort of stand up more agile, more integrated solutions from day one, and if they're able to offer those as a service, then that can help some of the more established players get a leg up and get into some of these areas quicker than trying to build it themselves.
Yeah. No, good stuff. So maybe brings us a little bit into adoption as well, which is one of the areas I really wanted to talk about, just to understand like how we go about facilitating greater adoption of RegTech. So again, maybe one for you, Yvonne, but feel free to chip in if you want, Mick. Just I want to understand like the biggest challenges that we're facing as an industry and that individual businesses are facing when we're looking to deploy RegTech solutions. So what are the thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I've kind of alluded to one of them, the legacy system point, and Mick's mentioned that as well. I mean, I think sometimes some of these challenges are not necessarily unique to RegTech. We see them in the context of any tech change process that our financial services clients will engage in. So there's a systems challenge. There's also, I think, sometimes a cultural challenge, and I think for what I would mean by that is that it's really important that a RegTech solution isn't seen as a technology project. It needs to be seen in the business context and have the buy-in from the compliance team and others that need to be involved in it. So, I think that is so important. And I'm sure, Mick, that's something you've come across as well, is taking this away from it being something the tech team is owning to something that the whole business is owning, so that it gets what it needs from it.
Absolutely, and I think that to Yvonne's point, to me, technology is not the answer. Technology to me is an enabler, and what I'm focused on specifically, as I mentioned earlier, is SMCR, and what the FC are really looking to drive is culture change, and a change in behaviour. So I think technology can help to enable that, but what it means is it needs a change in attitudes, and maybe that first change in attitude is not to see regulation purely as a burden and a hindrance, but it means a change to practices, routine systems. So I think that the more we consider the financial industry and individual organisations as complex systems, the better. And I think it's an area that I particularly specialise in, is that organisations are living systems. They are complex systems. And the nature of complexity means it is uncertain and unpredictable. But we don't like to hear that, and our board of directors don't like to hear it, and our shareholders don't like to hear it. But really, that's what creates tension within every organisation. We've got a real desire for efficacy and a surety of an outcome. But we're in a world of change and a dynamic environment and a world of entropy. So we've got this real tension between this burning desire for efficacy and a surety of an outcome versus this thing, this universe we live in that's in a constant state of change. And I think the more we can, change our practices, change our systems that recognise that, I think the more adept we'll be at managing a dynamic environment.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I suppose the other angle to this is just that we shouldn't forget that just like any tech project, whoever the financial institution is that's getting on board with it needs to get comfortable with who they're bringing on as the third party solution. Is the supplier appropriate? Do they pose any operational risk issues? Is the solution secure? And obviously, in the context of RegTech, things are just that bit heightened, because if you're trusting risk and compliance to a third-party tech solution, the consequences of it going wrong are obviously quite reputationally and potentially financially damaging. So, I would argue that's not necessarily unique to RegTech, but I think it does give an extra flavour to some of the kind of third-party solutions that are in play and how people look at them.
That's really interesting to hear that, and the stakes are really raised with RegTech. Mick, I guess you're sort of living and breathing some of these challenges day to day now anyway, given where you are with Haelo's journey. I think it's probably a wider conversation as well, like businesses that we're talking to, fintechs looking to partner with larger FS and just experience a whole host of challenges that makes it really difficult. Just wondering how we overcome that. But I guess you've touched on some of those areas there, Yvonne.
Yeah. I think as well, the opportunities that are there for collaboration are strong. There are opportunities for financial institutions to collaborate with RegTech businesses, and Mick's talked about machine learning and other areas. I think the other angle on collaboration in the RegTech context is quite interesting, is that three-way collaboration among the financial institution, the fintech, and the regulator itself, and it goes back to my point that the stakes are high for the financial institution in doing this, so they want to know that the regulator's on board with the solution. And I think we've certainly seen the FCA engaging with its own reg sandboxes and its networks like GFIN and other things that they're trying to kind of give firms more of a steer, the chance to test products and services in a kind of safe environment. So I think that kind of collaboration is also incredibly useful in terms of bringing forward RegTech solutions.
Yeah, and I think like the role of academia within that as well. I'd read a stat that I was quite surprised by. I think it was something like 3% of UK R&I is attributed to financial services, and I was just shocked by that. So is that something that we're seeing in Scotland? Like, is there a lot of collaboration going on around the RegTech space? I know there's some stuff happening out of the University of Strathclyde. But yeah, what's the current situation with like the academic collaboration here, and what are we seeing there?
Yeah, I think we could certainly do a lot more in this area, and I think that we've touched on it a couple of times. This is not unique to the financial industry. This cross cuts, I would say, all industries to some degree. Ironically, I'm doing a piece of work for Glasgow Caledonia University at the moment, looking at knowledge transfer partnerships and how we map academic capability to real world applications, and how we then signpost that to potential KTP partners. And I think the challenge is that we in industry and we in academia, we tend to move in different circles, and to some degree we talk in a different language. So there's things that keeps us awake at night, that we're really wrestling with. And ironically, academia might already, have solved it or be in the process of solving it. So I think it's how we connect the two and join the dots. And I would say that I think some SMEs, probably not SMEs, but almost say innovation-driven enterprises as opposed to an SME, I would say are actively engaged with academia. But I would say that they're the exception to the rule. I think many organisations, many small organisations, are suffering in silence. And I think that the more we engage with academia, I think the better it will be, to a mutual benefit. And I think that's where I think FinTech Scotland, I think, can play a role. I think Scottish Financial Enterprise can play a role in terms of, I think, joining the dots and being enablers and integrators and signposters between the world of industry and the world of academia.
I think that's right. And I think we should also sort of mention as well the opportunities, the sort of innovation labs that financial institutions themselves run, and FinTech Scotland are involved in some of those too. You know, they've collaborated with Lloyds Bank on their launch innovation program, and you know that's giving businesses the opportunity to run proof of concept but also help them navigate that process of sourcing and being judged safe to contract with. That can sometimes be a challenge, you know, when you maybe come out of a really promising academic collaboration, but then you hit the full might of a sourcing practice in a large bank and realize how many boxes you've got to tick. So being able to do a bit of both while you're in the proof of concept stage, I think is really positive. So those collaborations are also useful, I think, for the industry to develop.
No, good stuff, and hopefully we see more of that in the future, and you know, more collaborations. So just to finish off then, I just wanted to maybe to look into the future a bit. So just to put you on the spot a bit, Mick, you mentioned quite a lot of different technologies there that we can expect to see. You see, you can't say Haelo, but just if you would look in the future and say like any one piece of technology or any one company that we can look out for that you think is going to have a big impact coming out of Scotland. Yeah, keen to hear your thoughts on that, and the same from you, Yvonne, as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think it's understanding firstly what is the problem we are endeavouring to solve, and do we as solutions providers really understand the pain that the industry or the financial sector is experiencing at the moment. And I know from personal experience, as much as I've not managed a financial business, I've managed several regulated businesses within both aerospace and aviation. And the biggest challenge for me as a senior manager was knowing what was going on in real time or near real time, and making sense of the many moving parts that I was accountable for. And now in my consultancy role, I often ask senior leaders, do you know what's going on in your business right now? And should you be worried? And I'm often met with a puzzled or a quizzical look. So one of the things that I'm not a fan of is risk management. And I think risk management has evolved into some sort of formulaic, sometimes, you know, a fancy Excel spreadsheet that looks at the probability of a risk and the impact of the risk and the severity of the risk and the mitigating actions. But what I don't see is many risk registers that predict the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you know, the cost of living crisis, COVID, etc. And nor should they. So I found myself many years ago, despite having been trained as a director, despite having become a chartered director, on the wrong side of a whistleblower 5 months before IPO of the company. So I had the privilege of the group compliance director and his team descending upon me for 7 weeks and sitting on my shoulders morning, noon, and night, which was the most horrendous experience in my working career, and certainly something I'm never allowed to happen. So I think I think risk management has a place. I think we need to get better at threat intelligence. And I think identifying, to Yvonne's point, either anomalies or anomalous patterns at the earliest opportunity and jumping on them. And I think that the more we can reduce the cycle time between the detection of an anomaly and the response to it, the less exposure we'll have to risk. But that means that's a very dynamic way of managing, as opposed to this kind of very structured, formulaic way that we do it today. And I think in terms of threat intelligence, one of the things that I tend to talk about is what I describe as the data mosaic. And if you remember the game Catchphrase, that I think still is on the telly, you know, where you've got this catchphrase that's concealed by rectangles, the contestants press a buzzer, they remove a square, and then what they try and do is guess the catchphrase that's behind the squares. And obviously, the more squares that you remove, the more information you've got, and the more likelihood of the probability you've got of getting the answer right. And I think that where we get it wrong at the moment is that we tend to be, I think we're more and more seduced by technology, we're more and more seduced by data. But we think more than we say, and we say more than we write. And the data we're working with at the moment is the stuff that's written down. But there's lots and lots of data that we've got in conversations and in people's heads. It's how we squeeze that intelligence out. And I think that will give us a much richer picture. And I think as long as we take this very kind of reductionist view of a complex environment, we're working with very discrete data sets. And we're trying to almost say, well, the condition of this entire organization is based on these 5 or 6 data sets. But there's lots of white space between the data sets. And to me, that's where threat and that's where risk lurks. And I think the better we are at starting to almost remove those squares and get a much richer understanding of the environment, I think the better. I don't think there is one solution. I do think blockchain, I think, can have a role to play in this. I think machine learning can definitely have a part to play in this. But as I said earlier, let's not be seduced by technology for the sake of technology. Let's use technology appropriately to the solution that we're trying to solve.
Thanks, Mick. And Yvonne, what about you? You must see some fascinating stuff with all the businesses that you're working with. So what are your thoughts on this?
It's interesting because, if I'd gone first, I would have said, real-time risk monitoring as well, because I think that is just so important, trying to move from a kind of rear view mirror version of events into being able to look at risk and also manage risk in real time to enable, because, as we know in the context of consumer products, consumers demand they want things right there and then. They want decisions to be made there and then, but they don't want to be defrauded. So it's trying to get a balance between those two things. That you're carrying out the appropriate checks without completely degrading the customer experience. So I think that's incredibly important. And I guess maybe just to build on what Mick was saying laterally there, I think it's going to be important in the roadmap and other innovation calls to think about how we develop the skills of regulators and compliance professionals to really understand technology and how it can be applied in finance. So, it's a bit of a kind of fundamental, but there's some amazing stuff out there. But if you don't really get how it could work and how you could use it, you're not going to buy it. So I think there's definitely some stuff around skills there as well, and thinking about how we can upskill some of those folks to really understand the possibilities with some of the technology that's out there.
Well, that's a really interesting one around the skills. Thanks, Yvonne. Good to hear that you're in agreement as well. I don't want any fights breaking out on the podcast. So. But no, it's been great. So we've unpacked a lot there. Some really good insights around regulation, why it's so important, the role we can expect to see data technology playing in the future. So Yvonne and Mick, thanks again for your time. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you and to hear your knowledge, your passion, your expertise on the topic. Just to all the listeners, I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Please look out for other episodes moving forwards. We'll be joined by other guests, and I'm sure Yvonne and Mick, we'd love to have you back on at some point. We'll continue to dive into the FinTech Scotland R&I roadmap, and moving forwards, we'll be talking to many other founders and leaders in FinTech businesses to understand a little bit more about them and the people that are driving the growth of FinTech in Scotland. You can visit FinTech-Tables.com for more news and insights from the industry and information on how we can help you raise your voice within the FinTech sector in Scotland through events, media and marketing. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.